All right, so welcome everybody. Deanne, Matt, Taylor, Jack, Sarah. Today we're doing a sequence I created that I call the pendulum. And a pendulum, of course, is something that swings back and forth. And so the idea in today's sequence is to articulate our femur or our thigh bones. This is our femur underneath here. So articulate just means to move. And generally what we want to do to keep our joints healthy is to articulate them to their maximum on a regular basis, not beyond their maximum. So we're not trying to increase or go beyond what we can do, just to do what we can do. And sometimes when we do that on a regular basis, it does increase. Sometimes, for some people. That's not the purpose, though. That's not the point. The purpose in articulating our joints is just to keep them healthy, to keep them functioning. I know I didn't know this growing up, but our bodies are basically a use it or lose it proposition. So that includes everything, includes your brain. We're learning stuff about dementia and Alzheimer's, that things like nuns who copy scriptures on a regular basis, they have much less instance of Alzheimer's and dementia than the general population. Is that the only reason? Who knows? There might be other reasons too, but using your brain can really help your brain keep functioning. That's why things like retirement and all that kind of thing may not actually be the best thing for your health. It may be something you're really looking forward to, laying down your burden, but actually in terms of your health. And same goes for your body. So if we sit in a chair all day and we don't use our hips, the ability of our hips to move and to be stable and to be free of injury and arthritis and things like that is hampered. Now, I'm not saying doing this is going to cure arthritis or cause all your problems to go away in terms of your hip health, but generally speaking, and I think most of modern science and medicine is pointing in this direction, it will help mitigate any problems that you have. So if you are going to have problems, they're going to be less. And you possibly can head off many, many problems by doing this. So I think many of you have heard me say in the past, great way to think of what we're doing is maintenance for the body. Maintenance for the body. Okay, so we're doing that on a regular basis. We want to maintain our body. All right, so today starts somewhat active. And we start with a marauding bear. Move around a little bit. Stretch it out. And we're just trying to bring some blood flow and movement just into the torso. Even though today's class doesn't focus on the torso, we still are going to be using it. And then when you're done with that, you come into this pose, which targets the hips and legs more. All right, so the down dog, just rolling over your toes, circling your ankles, bending your knees. Okay, and then our first pose is one that we don't do too often. So some of you may have never done this pose with me, and you might actually be surprised that it's in a yin class. It's called a dragon. Bring the right foot forward. Left foot forward. Bring your left foot forward because we're going to target the right leg. So left foot forward, right knee to the ground. And what most people want to do here is this, but we're going to do the opposite of that. Okay, so we're going to raise up like so. All right, and what we're looking for is a stretch right here, the front of our right hip. These are called our hip flexors. And this articulation is called hyperextension. So we're bringing our femur, this is the first of our articulations, hyperextension. Sorry if my head is being cut off here. It's kind of hard not to have it cut off at this the way that the camera is set up. But what's important is you see my lower body. So it doesn't really matter what's up here. There's nothing interesting happening. Okay, so it's all down here, stretching the front of the hip. You should feel it. And this should feel safe. So if your right knee doesn't like being on the ground directly, put a little padding underneath it. Now again, many people will feel more comfortable here. We want to avoid that. Why? Because we are bringing this into hyperextension, and the joint, every joint is made up of two bones. That's what a joint is. A joint is where two bones meet. So in this case, one bone is our femur, and the other is what's called the ilia, but more specifically what's called the acetabulum, which is the socket for the hip. Okay, so the acetabulum, and imagine this is your femur bone. So this looks a lot like your femur bone actually. So your femur bone is long and thin. You have the neck of the femur, which is right here, and then you have what's called the head of the femur. And that could be at different angles, just depends on your body. And then that fits inside of that socket. So if I go like this, it may not be obvious to you unless you've studied some anatomy, but I'm actually tilting my pelvis forward. And that is bringing me out of hyperextension. So it's two bones that need to be positioned properly. One is the femur, and I've done that with this. That's also why this doesn't work, right? You might be like, well, I feel more comfortable back here. Yeah, but you're not in hyperextension back there. It's when the leg is being pulled behind you and your pelvis is basically upright. It's the combination of those two things that give us this articulation. Now, why is this articulation so difficult for some? One possible explanation is we spend so much of our day with the femur in the opposite articulation, what we call flexion, and we're going to look at that next. So again, use it or lose it. If I don't bring my leg into hyperextension that often, then I begin losing the ability. What is one of the signs I'm losing the ability? It starts to become difficult. It starts to become painful. Okay, let's switch sides. All right, take your time, but eventually make your way over to the other side. All right, same idea here. We're bringing our femur, our thigh bone, into hyperextension, stretching the front of the left hip, okay? Should feel that there. Now, what are some things that you can do if you're feeling a lot of sensation? Well, it's okay to back off some if it's too much. That's up to you. You do want to feel some stretching. That's kind of letting you know that it's working. If you don't feel any sensation at the front of your hip, it's a good chance that really nothing is happening actually. You're just striking a pose, but that pose isn't actually creating any real benefit for your body. So you can back off a little bit. You want to be sure that, again, the sensations you're feeling are within the range of what you feel is safe for your body. So that's different for everybody. What we feel is safe. If you've had a hip replacement, or you have arthritis, or there's a lot of pain, then maybe it's too much for you. So again, you may need to back off some. Another thing that you can look at is breathing slowly and deeply. So you may have noticed in this class, we don't talk a lot about breath, and in other styles of yoga, they do. And that's intentional. I was taught yin yoga by Paul Grilly. He's the gentleman that basically wrote and published the first DVD and book on yin yoga. And he taught me that there's a yin and a yang to everything. And one of the things about yang is structure, rhythm, repetition. Nothing wrong with that stuff. If you come to the Monday class that I teach, that's much more that way. It's much more disciplined, structured. We breathe in a certain way, we move in a certain way. But the yin is the opposite of that. So in yin, we're not trying to control our breath, but rather just sort of observe our breathing. Notice what our breathing might be doing, if you want. There isn't one particular mental focus for a practice like this, at least most of the time the way that I teach it. Having said that, if you are feeling a lot of sensation and you want to slow your breath down, deepen your breathing, breathe into a certain area where there's a lot of pain, feel free to do that. You can absolutely do that in yin yoga. There's no rule saying that that's wrong or bad. I'm just most of the time not going to teach it in that way. Okay, let's go ahead and come on out of that. And we'll rest on our back for a few moments. That's called a rebound. Very important part of the practice, actually. Just a few moments of stillness before we counter stretch. Let's bring our legs in, we'll give them a little squeeze, and we shake it out, a little bit of movement. This is called the leg cradle, and the movement helps to counteract all the stillness that we just had. And there's no particular way to move, just whatever feels right. I'm just experimenting and seeing how my body reacts to the different movements. I'm repeating movements that feel particularly nourishing or balancing or healing. And then we come up to seated using the hinge. So hands under your hips, palms down, legs straight up. If there's pain in your back, you're going to bend your knees. Otherwise, keep those legs straight. Lift the head and neck. Take a deep breath. Exhale, lower the legs toward the ground just before they touch. Inhale, legs up, and exhale up to seated. Okay. Right leg straight, left foot to the inside of the thigh. This is called a half butterfly. And we just relax forward and down. And what we want to feel is a stretch in the back of our right thigh. You notice my spine is rounding. I'm not holding or pulling my leg. I'm not trying to go further. I do feel a stretch in the back of the right thigh. And then I just relax here. So these poses, these two poses, are very yin and yang. They are opposites, right? The first pose was relatively active. Probably quite uncomfortable. This posture is passive for most people. You can just relax into it. And there's probably an enjoyable stretch in the back of your thigh. You can, of course, use support. You could put a block under your forehead, under your knee. You could sit on a block. You could put 2 blocks under your forearms. You could even put a block or a rolled blanket under this leg if this stretches a little too much for you. But don't feel that you need to use props. In yin yoga, much of the time you can practice without using them. Okay, switching sides. This is half butterfly. Okay, so gradually coming up and then back onto your back. Again, that is a rebound. Try and wait to counter stretch and just relax and feel the sensations in your back, in your hips. And then we'll bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze and shake it out. Move around a little bit. And then when you're ready, hinge up. I'll reiterate, there really shouldn't be any pain in your back as you do that hinge move. So if there is, bend your knees. If that doesn't do the trick, find a different way of making your way up to seated, okay? Okay, so now we're moving into what I call a kickstand. So we come back to tabletop. You may want to face the long side of your mat. And we will take you could also move to the left side if you don't have room. We take our right leg out to the right like so. Okay, and what we're looking for is a stretch on the inside of the thigh. So you can point your toes up, away from you, forward. Your hips can be over your left knee or press back toward your left hip. Your left foot can be behind your knee or pulled in closer to your buttocks, so lots of options. How do you know which one you should do, which options you should choose? Choose the one that feels safe and yet where you still get a stretch, and then also the thing that is the most comfortable for you ultimately. So we're not trying to make ourselves uncomfortable outside of the discomfort that is inherent in exercising the tissues that we're targeting. So in this case, the adductors here are getting a stretch. Again, the femur is coming into what's called abduction. That's the name of this articulation. The last one was called flexion. I know I didn't say much in that last set of postures. That was called flexion, and that's the opposite of the hyperextension that we started with. Again, the pendulum will move the femur in opposite directions. We have basically 6 movements for the femur bone. Of course, those can be combined for almost an infinite number of articulations, but there are 6 basic movements, and so that's what we're going to try and focus on. Some of the moves today actually will combine the movements. It's really hard to actually isolate them to just one movement, and it's not important, nor does it give us the best stretch necessarily, nor is it the best way to practice. So we're not going to worry about that too much. About 2 minutes in, we got about a minute left here. So just relax and hold the posture. The benefits of yin yoga come from the long holds. So I can't see you guys at home, but hopefully if I could, I wouldn't see you guys coming in and out of the poses and squirming the entire time. It's fine to make adjustments from time to time. They're necessary by all means, but we want to minimize them. We want to eliminate unnecessary movements and try and minimize the amount of movement while we're in the postures. Okay, so we will gradually make our way over to the other side. Take your time. So I call this one kickstand. It's a type of half frog. That's not important for you to know necessarily, but half frog is a pretty standard yin posture. I just found when I taught half frog to people, the vast majority of people experience half frog as a hamstring stretch, which was the other pose that we just did a moment ago, that forward fold. And hamstring stretches are great, but it's also great to target the adductors more independently of the hamstrings. They're very intimately related, so when you're stretching one, you're often stretching the other, especially if you're doing a forward fold of some sort. But here I find we can isolate the adductors more, and so that's exactly what we're trying to do here. These frog variations are very often difficult for people, challenging. There can be a lot of sensation, and so again, you might ease off just enough so that you aren't enduring too much sensation, which could be an indication that you're actually hurting yourself, you're actually overdoing it. And you can also use your breathing. The breath is intimately linked with your autonomic nervous system. There are many functions within the body that we cannot control consciously. So things like relaxation, Have you ever had someone yell relax at you and you actually feel relaxed? Right? If I were to yell, relax already, would you would you automatically feel relaxed? No, things like relaxation are not really under our conscious control. And that goes for our muscles too. They need to receive certain stimulus very often to relax fully and deeply. And so long, slow, deep breathing is one of those cues. So while I can't control my autonomic nervous system consciously, I can control my breath consciously. By controlling my breath consciously, I can control my autonomic nervous system. So you can think of your breath as a kind of a lever. Again, I don't teach a lot of breathing in this class. If you want to learn more about the breathing and how it can keep us in a relaxed state, come to the Monday class, which is much more challenging than this one in many ways, but it is more adept or more appropriate for teaching those kinds of breathing techniques. Okay, we're going to come on out of this. And let's again rest on our back for a few moments. Okay, we bring the legs in, give them a little squeeze, shake it out. And then we hinge up to seated. Okay, next pose is another forward fold. This one can be tricky for some people, and then it's like a complete no-brainer for others. It's called shoelace. We take the right leg over, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to point my right knee as far over to the right as I can go. That's about it for me. And then I do the same on the other side. Okay, so that's called a shoelace. And again, I come forward and down, and I want to feel stretch out the outside of my hips, one or both. Doesn't matter, either way, one or both. Okay, so I come forward. Again, I can use props to support my body. Now, some people just have a really hard time doing this. Their leg sort of pushes them over, or this leg is up here like this. They can't get it down. So that's you. I recommend do this on your back. You just come onto your back and pull, manually pull the legs toward you and away from one another. It's going to be more work to do that, but it will be probably safer, more effective. You could also go up against a wall to do that. So you can use props and things to get yourself against the wall and make that happen. Okay? Otherwise, again, we're going to be here for 3 minutes. This is, again, the opposite of what we were just doing, which is called abduction. AB. They sound very similar. Adduction, abduction. If I say them really quickly, you may not know which one I'm saying. Abduction, abduction, is just like when you abduct someone. What do you do when you abduct them? You take them away. Adduction, AD, just like addition. Adduction is when you bring things in. Okay, so we're bringing our femurs in and even across the body rather than away from the body. We're bringing them in. We're adding them back, adding them in. Okay, and that stretches these muscles out here, which interestingly are called abductors because they do the opposite. Abductors, they do the opposite movement. So that's the way muscles work, is generally one set of muscles do one action, another set do the other action. And so when we want to stretch one group, we have to do the opposite of the action that those muscles create. Very simple, basic way of thinking about stretching. So even though today's class focuses on articulating the femur, we are also stretching muscles most of the time, different groups of muscles. Okay, let's switch sides. Take your time. Side 2. This is called a shoelace. It's a yin variation of cow face pose, Gomukhasana in traditional yoga. Gomukhasana has some arms that go along with it that are pretty challenging for many people, so we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to focus on the benefits for the hips here. Okay, so we come up and then back onto our back. We relax in a rebound for a few moments. Just feel the sensations. Now your mind might find that very, very boring. And that's okay. It's not, yoga is not meant to be entertainment. Our minds love a three-ring circus. They just are constantly wanting to be stimulated and fed information and new novel content. So that's just the nature of the mind. And it can become problematic. And I think that's a little bit where we are with our current situation with social media and the internet, and there's just a lot of information being thrown our way, a lot of stimulation, mental stimulation. And the reason I say it's potentially a problem is a lot of diseases, both physical and mental, are on the rise. And so if this were really good for us, then we should be getting happier and healthier. But it's very likely that we've turned a corner. We've gone a little too far in one direction. And so another part of yoga, we don't speak much about it in this class, but another part of yoga is just learning to get a handle on what's going on in our head. And so it's okay to be bored. It's actually okay to not have a constant stream of stimulation for our mind. All right, let's bring our legs in. We'll give them a little squeeze, shake it out. And then again, we hinge our way up to seated. And now we move into potentially the most problematic of our articulations, which are the rotations. So again, the femur's a ball and socket. It moves forward, back, left, right, but it also rotates. It rotates. So we're going to look at that now. Before we do that, let's just do a little bit of what we did at the beginning of class, the marauding bear. Just getting some blood flow, and then the down dog. And then we come into what's called a sleeping swan. This creates external rotation in the femur. So my right foot is over at the left side of my mat. The foot can flex or point. Okay. My hips are down and back. I could stay up on my hands if I want, or I can come down to my forearms. Again, I could use a block under my forehead. I could put a block under my hips. Some other things to think about are your right knee. Is it pointing straight ahead or out to the right? Is your right foot closer to your left hip or pulled toward the front of your mat? Is your right foot flexed or pointed? Again, lots of options because there are lots of different body types. And so we need to work with our body type rather than trying to practice yoga with the idea that there's one ultimate body type and that we're trying to transform our body into that body type. And the reason we want to avoid that is that eventually we will get injured if we practice consistently and persistently in that way. You see, yoga delivers its greatest benefits through consistent and persistent practice, and it will also create its worst injuries through the same manner. If we aren't practicing something properly, then over time that can lead to an injury. Okay, let's switch sides. I think that this pose, which in yin we call sleeping swan, in other styles it's sometimes called a pigeon. I think this pose, for some people it's their favorite yoga pose, and for others it's quite a challenging posture. Make sure there's no strain on your knee here, okay, meaning your left knee, the one in front. It's okay if you feel some sensation, you just don't want that sensation to feel at all dangerous or harmful. Same with your ankle. We want to feel at the outside of our left hip on this side, and we want to feel it deep inside the hip in what are called the deep six rotators. Okay, so let's go ahead and again come back onto our back. Take your time. Feel the rebound. Let's bring the legs in, give them a little squeeze. We shake it out. And then we do one last set. So again, hinge up. And we now look at internal rotation. To do that, we take the saddle pose. Now I want you to be very careful when doing this posture. So I want to be careful of the knee, the ankle. Okay, so if you need to sit on something, please do. If you need to pad your foot, please do. The foot can point toes back or toes out to the side. The knee can point straight ahead or again out to the side. We can sit on something again if necessary. And because we're looking at rotation, the further my foot comes from my hip, the more rotation I get. This is the extreme right angle here, and you may not be able to see, but my hip isn't touching the ground. And the reason for that is I'm actually beyond my personal limit. So that's why my hip is lifting. I would be probably right around here. So my knee is okay, my ankle is okay, and my hip is okay. Now I don't feel much here, and as I've said before, there's always an exception to every rule. So often we feel a stretch. In this pose, you might damage your knee or your ankle before you feel anything, and that's just the way that it goes. So that's our edge. Our edge today is dictated by safety rather than how much we can feel the pose. Having said that, if you'd like to lower back onto your hands, elbows, or crown of your head, you may. It's not by any means required. Feel free to stay upright. If your knee comes up a little bit, it's fine. That's what my knee is doing. And if you come back far enough, you may begin to feel a stretch at the front of your thigh. If you don't, and you want to, you can bend this knee up, drop it out to the side, or even pull this leg in towards you, and that might help you feel that stretch. Those are your quads. So again, that's a muscle group that we can potentially stretch in this position. So this is the half saddle, what we call half saddle in yin yoga. And again, we're using it today to articulate, to internally rotate this bone, the femur bone here. Why? Because again, that helps keep the joint functioning optimally. If I never internally rotate, then over time that function decreases. It gets harder to do it, painful, difficult, or we may even just damage ourselves by trying to do it. And these are things that we naturally could do before, for instance. Not sure about guys, but I think many young women can do like a full split when they're girls. And then as they get older and they grow up, they no longer can do a full split. Well, what if we just forced them into one day? We said, well, you used to be able to do it, so you should still be able to do it. You would tear their hamstrings. You would tear the muscles in the back of their legs. You would damage their body for sure. So, moral of the story is if those girls had kept stretching consistently, persistently, it's very likely they could keep their split, maybe to the end of their life. So it's not important to do a split. I'm not saying that that's some sort of important measure of your health. I don't think that it is. In fact, some people that can do a split, you might say they're actually unhealthy. They have too much mobility in their body to the point where it actually is unhealthy for them. Many people don't know that. They think that flexibility is just a plus, but it actually can be problematic for some people. Okay, let's switch sides here. Same thing, this is the half saddle pose, and we are trying to internally rotate the femur as much as we can safely. So if you take one thing away from today's class, I think it's hopefully that if you don't use your brain, your body, you will eventually, they will lose their function. They will lose their range. And again, that includes our brain function, just every part of our body. And modern life is set up in such a way that it asks less and less of our physical body. You might say it asks too much of us mentally, and it asks too little of us physically. And again, what some of the side effects of this that we see are, increases in suicide rates, depression, anxiety, heart disease, cancer, inflammation in the body, all kinds of problems. And so, again, these are problems that there are certain tribal cultures that on the earth today, that if you go and find them, they are completely free of these diseases and problems. So, again, we often think of technology and advancement as solving our problems as human beings. We rarely think or are aware that actually these things may be creating as many problems or maybe even more problems than they're solving. So it's just something to be aware of. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying that there's somebody out there who's intentionally trying to hurt you or harm you. I think it's just human nature that someone invents something new, we get excited, we adapt it without really necessarily knowing how it's going to affect us physically, emotionally, psychologically, socially as a group. So again, a lot of the polarization that is happening here in the United States today, politically, many people at least give some credit to social media. That social media has allowed people to sort of isolate themselves from other points of view and enter into a sort of echo chamber. And again, I'm not saying one side or the other. So sometimes when I mention politics, people get upset because they think I'm taking a side. I'm not taking a side here. Just saying that if we only listen to voices that we already agree with politically, then we tend to get hardened in our view. We aren't open to hearing a different point of view anymore. And it's very easy to do that in our current environment. Okay, let's go ahead and come on out of that. Take your time. We'll just relax again on our back for a moment. Feel that rebound.